I'll just introduce myself first, sorry. My name's Nic Pryke. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a workplace consultant and design director of a company called Oktra. Just to give you some context for that, Oktra just does one thing, which is to create workplace environments for our clients, and that starts with trying to figure out how much space they need, challenging the way they work, which is the really exciting and refreshing part of that, and then actually designing and building their space. This morning we've heard the word innovation a lot, speed, change, and disruption. And if you're thinking about property and you're going to take those words and turn them into aspirations, your property has to be a part of that solution, I think. I'm actually a baby boomer. I'm 55, like I think probably a few other people in this room. When I started work a few decades ago, I was given a desk and a chair and a cup of coffee and actually an ashtray in those days. And I learnt to use a computer at work. And there's been a revolution, really, in the way that what workplace consultants call knowledge workers, people who work in offices, behave and work in their workplace since then. And my experience is actually with working with the legal sector as they're behind the game, if you don't mind me saying so, and catching up now with the rest of the corporate world. I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves in a moment, but there's some strong themes that come through when we work with the legal sector. Technology, how do you embrace technology and make that work in the workplace to facilitate how you want to work? Flexibility, how do you create a space? You know, in the end, an office is potentially a static thing. How do you make it flexible enough to take on board not just expansion, but different ways of working and the kinds of things that legal sector are dealing with, like changes in ratios between admin staff and fee earners, for instance. Millennials, we've heard them talked about this morning. How do you attract them? We know from research that they're more interested in their office space than previous generations. And how do you retain them? I've got 4 children, actually, and they're millennials. And I know if I send them an email, for instance, they think I've just sent them a letter written with a fountain pen on a piece of Basildon Bond writing paper. You know, it's a very formal thing to them. They communicate differently. And they work differently, and rather bizarrely, most of them have got better technology in their bedrooms than they actually have in their workplace. The whole business about decellularizing, coming out of offices, going open plan, it's a massive debate in the legal sector. It creates a lot of conversation, quite heated. As it happens, all my panelists work in open plan environments, which is quite interesting to me. And I know a couple of them work in environments where they actually desk share, or as they used to say, hot desk, which is another step beyond that. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to ask for questions from you guys. I think someone's roving with a microphone or will come hurtling towards you if you put your hand up. It'd be nice if you could just introduce who you are before you ask your question. That would be great. Would you like to start, David?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Pester. I'm managing partner at TLT. We have 6 offices across the UK, so we're a national firm. And what's interesting, we have been open plan, as mentioned earlier, since '03, but we're going through a major project at the moment. Some of you may know where we're upcycling a pre-existing 90,000 square foot building, which has given us the chance to work with a blank canvas. So the consultation with people has been a really interesting process for us in how we've begun to evolve the space more differently based on some of the things that have been talked about today.
I'm Clarke. I'm the managing partner of Mills & Reeve. We also have 6 offices, all of which are open plan. And last Monday, all of our colleagues in our Norwich office, having refurbished the office, just moved back into a new agile working environment following the lead of the London office, which did it about 2 years ago.
Good afternoon, I'm Michael Chissick. I'm managing partner at Fieldfishers. We're in about 18 locations, and apart from the UK, where we're open plan, they're all very traditionally cellular. So there is a contrast between the UK, where I think we're leading the way, and the rest of Europe.
Berg, managing partner of Osborne, Clarke. We actually last year moved into new premises in our Reading office, where we went from open plan to what we call connected working rather than agile, where we have unallocated desks and a totally different working space. Just one thing I would add about lawyers not being good at change, I think we're getting a bit of a bashing. I think lawyers adapt change. And what's been interesting for our consultants that came in, we said blank sheet of paper, and actually they came up with traditional sort of lawyer type open plan things. And we said, no, go back, start again. We want to be like our clients.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Is there any questions? Anybody got a question for us to get us going? Just raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, I'll ask a question actually of you, Ray. I'm interested in your last comment. We sometimes say back in our office that actually changing people's hearts and minds is harder than changing the office. And I wonder whether you put in place any strategies to take people on that journey.
I mean, we went through a massive period of consultation when we moved offices in Reading, and we're in the process of refurbing the London offices. And we're doing exactly the same thing. And it's understanding what the drivers are, but also making sure that our people understand what we're trying to achieve first and foremost, which is one, a workplace that hopefully reflects our brand and the values we stand for. But also it's about allowing them to work more effectively and to the best of their abilities. So tech-enabled, but also, Michael and I touched on this earlier, social space as well. Spaces at a premium in London. Our offices outside of the London and other offices on the continent have got more meeting spaces. So it's something we've had to look at in London quite hard. So we've driven down the sort of space per desk to ensure there's more meeting areas, casual sort of connections that can be made.
Did everybody come on board with that, or did you have some kind of strong, what we would call resistors? And how did you deal with them?
We call them terrorists. And you kind of know who they are, but actually it's got to be partner-led first and foremost, and I think you've got to be really clear about why you're doing it and what you're doing it for, and it's not about saving money. I mean, more often than not, you're probably going to end up paying slightly more money, but getting it into a better working space. And it does take time. There's always one or two people. You know, we had a big thing about trying to get rid of filing cabinets. You know, we've been a paperless office supposedly for 20 years, and people said, "Oh, I can't go paperless." And it's like, "Why not?" We don't have an online filing system. Well, we do. You just don't know how to use it. So you find there's lots of other little kind of levers that you can use, because most of the challenges that are put to you, you know, are kind of not real ones, but they're just, as you guys said, people don't want to change the way they're working.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say, we were talking about this before, what we did with the consultation period was allow people some flexibility. So having a platform on each of the floors, if you take the 90,000 square feet, 9 floors, 10,000 each, we allowed some of the practice groups to be flexible about what they did with the space to suit slightly different ways of working, but there was a common platform. So if we ever changed or wanted to scale back or move offices or change things, we could rely on a common fit out, but nonetheless, I think that helped enormously actually and deal with some of the concerns, because the corporate lawyers, for example, wanted a greater number of areas to break out and talk and spend time. Yeah. The real estate lawyers wanted slightly more by way of storage, notwithstanding we've been paperless as well. Like it's just trying to get something that creates the optimum working environment, really. And I think Ray's right, mirroring the clients. We need to be more relevant all the time.
On the hearts and minds point, we had a Generation Y, although probably it's more millennials now, consultation group, and so feedback from some of our colleagues, although on moving back in last week, they were very happy we'd taken into account some of their points, like cosy tea room spaces, you know, it's not just necessarily about tech, but again, it's about the breakout areas and them feeling comfortable in the environment that they were in.
Yeah. Michael, you've been, by the way, I'm going to keep my eye out for hands that are raised. You know, so if you do want to ask a question, just put your hand up. Otherwise, we'll keep a discussion going. I know, Michael, you've been in your open plan environment 3 years.
Yes.
Feedback, is it good?
Yeah, I mean, before we went there, and I'm sure anyone who moves to open plan gets this, it will never work for me, Michael, because we're litigators, we're corporate, we deal a lot of paper. But actually, although people think it's about saving money, we've found it's about supporting collaborative workings, it's about modern day working, it's about getting people talking to each other and getting off email and IM. And as you say, it picks up on the millennials. If you think about how people are working, they've come a long way from the ashtray on the desk and the private room. I can't imagine if you join a new law firm, anything worse than being stuck in an office by yourself at the end of the corridor, because that's the only free office. I'd want to join a firm and be in the hub of everything. So I have to say, although there were a few people who said it wouldn't work, we haven't lost anyone, and I would say probably 90% of people, if you ask them, would say, I wouldn't go back to selling offices if you paid me. There's a few Luddites and diehards, but that is the overwhelming view. It's a much more fun, collaborative, energetic environment.
Has anybody, we seem to have a kind of evangelistic panel here for open plan. Has anybody had a different experience? I'm interested in anybody who feels differently about that. Because I meet a lot of lawyers who do feel very differently about going into an open plan environment. Yes?
I mean, we're designing an office at the moment. I mean, I come from Kenya, so we're doing our own building. With the lawyers, I feel they don't like open plan. They wouldn't mind sharing an office, 2 or 3 people sitting in an office. But we're looking at more offices rather than open plan.
Okay.
Open plan is more for paralegals, PAs, and all that. You know, where facilities and resources are shared.
Yeah.
What we've done is we've done modular offices. So you could easily convert an office into like 4 working spaces or 2 and separate them. So we've done a modular design so that it's easy to convert it into open plan, just remove the partition.
Yeah. I think there's my experience is that you quite often actually have a conversation. I don't know if any of you had this as part of your journey to get to where you are, where people will go, okay, we'll do that thing. But you know what, can we have some kind of partitions between the desks? And actually you end up creating a compromise situation which doesn't you don't get the benefits of the open plan situation, and you lose your offices, but you're using the same footprint. Did you have those debates?
So earlier, each of the offices, as it's been redeveloped, has got better. The earlier versions of it had quite high partitions, which, what's the point, really? It created the walls.
Yeah.
No, I was going to add there definitely was an experience of adapting and taking account of some of the concerns people have, but also being conscious of unintended consequences. So while you might create an environment that on paper and develop from your experience is a good environment to work in, it's trying to get the balance right. So, we do spec some areas with less available seating for the number of people for certain teams, and they're absolutely fine with that. There are other areas where there's more space than people because of the way they want to work. But one thing I was going to pick up on, though, where you push the agile working model is remembering about how people are learning and being supervised. And it's just thinking a bit more creatively about that, because we did have feedback from our training cohort that they are adapting now. But to begin with, when you're used to working with a small group of people and you know where they're going to be, then that's extremely easy. But if you have a greater agility amongst the people working in a team, then making sure you know where they are to be able to supervise effectively and to get that experience from just being around what's going on, you just need to think about it differently. It doesn't mean it doesn't work, you just need to consider it. So there are some not so good consequences of being completely open, and that's just something you have to manage.
Yeah, a couple of points I'd add to that would be, we had one person who has hearing difficulties, and you need to be conscious of that, because whilst able-bodied, fully hearing people can tune out background noise and people on the phone, she was having difficulties with that, and so she was cranking up her hearing aid, which is just cranking up the background noise. So we need to work around that. And then you also do have to sort of slightly police the very noisy, stressy, I was going to say corporate, but often type, for whom you almost feel like, well, I might as well just do your deal if you're going to make so much noise about it.
Well, I agree with you, David, that you can't have one size fits all. I think you have to be mindful you are dealing with lawyers, and the biggest term of abuse you get is call centres, and I think you have to be sensitive to the fact that these are highly remunerated lawyers, and you need to make sure the environment is appropriate. So that might mean compensating with breakout lounges, a canteen, roof terrace, whatever it is. But you have to do something. I think people. But I'm intrigued, David, that you went down the trestle table route, which bench seating. Sorry.
Yeah, it was a bit of a journey, really, because we started off with in 2003 with a very generous space allocation. Again, taking Ray's point, it wasn't about money or Michael's point. It was about creating a better team working, and I think some people probably in the room know we do a lot of project work for particular large banks, which allows us, with the kind of working arrangements we had, to configure people from different disciplines together for 6 months, as opposed to having practice groups separated by floors or by whatever. So I think to begin with, the journey involved a bit of partitioning, but once we got used to, I think, that, and then the technology changed, and the fact that you're working off flat screens, we've got lots of people who are frankly standing, moving around, they don't really want to be at a desk all the time. We've over-specced on quiet areas and other areas where you can break out and sit from a whole range of different things. And I think that was the thing that really allowed us to have perhaps a slightly more vanilla desking arrangement, because people weren't using the desks as much. Actually, with the technology and the fact most people are moving around all the time, especially, at least in our practice, that was what we got the feedback on. So
we surveyed, and desk occupancy was sub 50% on average across the whole of the building. It's quite an expensive resource if it's used half the time between 9 and 5.
I mean, it's very unusual. We do a lot of research into exactly that, occupancy levels, which we'll go in and understand how people are working. And it's very unusual for that to go above, say, 65%. Legal practices actually tend to, be perhaps at the higher end of occupancy levels. I wonder if those, Ray and Claire, perhaps what ratios you've put in place with regard to your desk sharing.
Well, our occupancy levels are ranging from 66% right up to 84%. So we've got quite a couple of our offices are actually getting quite full. And so actually, for London it varies, because there's an awful lot of people coming down from the other offices using it for meetings and such like. But it's quite occupied, and equally Cambridge is now running quite. And so actually, it is likely for us to move to agile working for that office to better use the working. We have all the resourcing areas and quiet rooms, all the rest of it, but at the moment it's one person per desk, and it's starting to it's squeaking. So agile working will probably be the next step for that in order to better use the space.
Yeah. So it's your intention to push the number of people using that office, for instance, above the desk numbers?
Yes.
That's where you're going to go with it.
Well, it's either that or kick out some subtenants to make more space. So I think we should try agilely working the existing space that we've got before taking more space.
What's your experience, Ray?
It's similar. But we tried to move away from the concept of desks, because actually that meant you had to have these physical things. But actually, a lot of the people come through our offices, whether it's from overseas, Bristol, or whatever. And so actually, all we needed was a workspace. So we've talked about. So we have one workspace for 1.3 people, I think, is the ratio we're working on. But that covers a variety of stand-up sort of little coffee table things, an actual desk, a workspace, a bench area, quiet rooms and things like that. So we tried to move away from that concept of desks as well, because the whole thing was about allowing people to work differently, and especially the point about people coming in and out of different offices. What we found, particularly when we did the occupancy studies, was it was actually very misleading, because what would happen is someone would come up, they'd grab a desk, they'd stick their coat down, the desk looked occupied, and they were in a meeting downstairs the whole day. So they weren't really occupying the desk.
Yes.
So that goes into changing the way you work and get people to understand that and embrace that. So in the TVO office, we just have little desk lights that people are supposed to flick on and off to show that they're being used. And they are environmentally friendly lamps, I hasten to add.
Can you book, question for both of you actually, can you book online?
No, we didn't want any towels on desks.
No, we've got London and now Cambridge, London and now Norwich have a desk booking system which you can book online or is managed by reception. And then in Norwich we will have a traffic light system where you can walk up to a desk and it will show you whether it's red, amber, green. And in London you can book a desk for a week, 5 working days, and then you have to move. In Norwich, we flexed that out to 10 working days to get the mobility on the offices, on the desk going around.
And a digital system, in response to your comment there, can be configured quite easily. So if you don't swipe in, it defaults to empty.
Yeah,
yes.
we're actually looking at some sensors as well for the new system. The biggest issue with us was about people wandering around trying to find breakout rooms to go together. So that's where we're going to have these sensors that will show you where they're available. And I think the key thing, it's because it changes so fast, is somehow trying to retain some degree of flexibility. Because I think what we said to our people during the consultation process, and they're saying in London, we will get bits of this wrong, and also things will change, working practices will change. And it's one of the key aspects was making it great, but also making it such that you could actually change the physical construct.
Yeah.
But I think you said at the beginning, it is about the way you work. It's not about a physical thing first and foremost. And actually, it's a bit like we were talking about technology earlier. The desk and the chair should enable what you want to achieve rather than being the end goal.
Can I just make a point around agility, which is the thing we all talk about, which we're heading towards a future of the profession where people are working a lot more remotely, at home, partly in the office, at different offices. And I know some firms have gone this way, like Keystone, where it's all very much people working from home. But I think in our sort of medium-sized firms, I'm not sure we've quite worked out what the full implications are of going down the agile route for the very team, collaborative, how does it make people feel part of the firm if they're out a long time? I think that's a new thing, and we'll only see over the next few years how it goes in terms of retention levels, and because the great thing about the industry is you can measure output very easily. It's done in bills and time.
I mean, you can, if you use, for instance, a desk booking system, you can configure that to prioritise people within a certain practice group, for instance. So you can retain neighbourhoods.
Which is what we have in Norwich. We have zones.
No, we've done the same. We've created areas where there are predominant teams that operate, because they are teams that particularly require a degree of stability and location, not so much with other teams. So I think it goes back to your point. You'll probably find it evolves differently for different practice groups. It's an experimentation as well. I agree with Ray. I think you have to listen as much as plan, because if you're doing the execution and it's not creating an appropriate environment for people, you need to react and respond to that. You have to adjust.
Do a sweep for questions. Has anybody got a question they would like to ask? Okay. Perhaps we could... Oh, sorry. Yes. If you could introduce yourself first, please.
Now we're in trouble.
I'm Kat Griffiths, I'm the lawyer. I'm very interested. Actually, David, you've sort of semi-answered some of what I was going to ask, which is a lot of this discourse is around anti-territorialism within law firms, actually for spreadsheet reasons and efficiency reasons and so on. I'm just wondering, and I speak frankly as someone who can't stand the idea of hot desking, and I have a desk full of paper. How does that actually affect? You mentioned the word neighbourhood, which is an interesting one. Yeah. How does that affect actual teamwork? You mentioned that you have to create a sense of place that people want to come to and be with their team. But everything that you've said so far does sound like everything sort of, sort of spread over in all sorts of different ways, and it doesn't sound terribly human. So therefore, I want to ask how, therefore, do you retain that sense of teamwork and that sense of neighbourhood that actually creates the culture that all of your firms trade so heavily on?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I first of all start by saying I'm sure we don't get it right all the time. I think it is a revolution we're going through as a sector, and I think we're learning. We've learnt a lot from some of the other people we've worked with, the clients, about what their experience have been of that very thing, about sense of place, because you want to have one firm, a culture that evolves, but your values constant. You want people to feel that they're belonging to something, and I think the zoning was quite important for that, partly for the development of people who are training, partly for the development of good communication beyond just simply relying on any electronic form. I think being together, spending time together, communicating, talking, sharing views is important. So I suspect what's helped is that we've got to the scale now where we've got enough people in places that you're not feeling isolated as much, so there's always a common number of people present. But we do pay attention to it, Kat. I think there's a danger of pushing it too far, and talking to some of the clients in professional services who went completely agile, they did suffer a bit of a detachment from the organisation, exactly what you're touching on. And so we're kind of conscious of that, because we always get feedback from clients about the fact that our team members have a good appreciation of what each other's doing, that they're very open and they get on. I think you sometimes need to remember that being in a place with people is as important as having all sorts of structures and systems. My take on it is we keep listening. But the push in the latest iteration of our buildings was for creating more different areas for different practice groups based on the way they wanted to work. So responding to their need as much as anything.
Can I just ask, we're probably 2 or 3 minutes left. Is that sound about right. Ray, I'm interested, you've talked a little about technology and how that's supported what you've been doing. Were you driven into reviewing your technology and your hardware as part of this project?
No, I mean, we actually had pretty much all the technology we needed. It was just actually making the older generation of people realise that they actually needed to learn how to use it. So we actually went through a process of at-desk training. So rather than having to embarrass yourself in a room full of people and say you couldn't send an email and you had to dictate it to your PA or whatever it was, we just found, and people have different needs as well. You know, they don't need to learn the whole gamut of stuff. So that actually helped people. So, I mean, we had double screens, everyone had laptops. There was a little bit of hardware kit we put on the desks, and we had to adapt it because we had people coming from the different offices. And that was about it, really. So it was then really getting people to use the technology. And the biggest challenge on technology is probably people's connections at home, if they were working outside of the office, was the biggest challenge. And so we've looked, you know, we have in instances sort of funded boosters and stuff like that for it. But it was just getting people to, it was quite a good moment for us, actually, aside from this, to actually people to kind of go, oh, actually, I don't know how to do that, and they were too embarrassed to ask otherwise. So it kind of had unintended good consequences in that sense.
There's a lot of, you're probably aware, software being developed specifically for the legal sector to help with that interaction with the screen, because there's quite often resistance in reading information on the screen, and there's a lot of printing and annotating that gets done manually, whereas actually, you know, millennials, for instance, are more used to working directly onto digital, you know, type hardware and so forth. We could talk about this for a lot longer. We've run out of time. I think there's just as a little kind of takeaway for me, actually, is that it's interesting to hear how the good experience you've all had from going open plan in slightly different nuances of how you're using it. There's the whole debate about decellularizing is so interesting to me, and I spend a lot of my days talking to lawyers about offices and walls and partitions and things like that. So it's been quite refreshing to hear all four of you, you know, putting a really positive spin on that. I think our experience actually of building legal environments is it's very unusual now for a legal firm to come to us and go, let's build loads of offices and put all the admin staff in the middle. You know, that doesn't happen, but there's still a kind of in-between thing which is going on. So that's really interesting. I'm from Oktra, as I mentioned at the beginning. We've got a stand actually down where you've got some food, and if you want to ask more questions of myself or any of them, I've got a few colleagues here as well. We're going to be loitering over there. But otherwise, thank you all very much for attending. I think there's another panel set of people coming straight onto the dais here. So thank you, panelists. Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming along and joining in. Thanks.